This is always fun when this happens. Oh, this is Aaron Matei Day on the Jimmy Dore Show.
Oh, I have jokes for this.
I got him.
Oh, good.
Jake Sullivan is asked. No, who is Jake Sullivan? He's an advisor to Biden, right? What kind of an advisor is he?
He's the national security advisor.
The national security advisor. Boy. Jake Sullivan, 46, is asked if he's worried by criticism that we're spending billions to support Ukraine, not spending it here. You want to hear what he says? Here's what he says.
How worried are you about the American people's staying power on this issue? Granted, there are no American troops involved, but we do have a short attention span. The war has become grinding in a kind of way. Do you worry about criticism that we're spending billions and millions of dollars to support Ukraine and not spending it here?
It's my job to worry, so I worry about literally everything. I worry about my answer to this question. So yes, I guess I worry, but in a way that's sort of not saying anything at all.
This is the being John Malkovich portion of our session.
But fundamentally, no. And I think it's very important.
Stop right there. You had me at fundamentally no. Do you worry about that we're spending money on a Ukraine proxy war instead of taking care of our problems at home? Fundamentally no.
He just said, do you worry that the people are mad? He didn't even say the morality of that in and of itself. I didn't realize the question. I was like, do you worry Americans are going to get upset with you for not doing? Like, no.
Fundamentally, no. Fundamentally, when you get right down to it, at the end of the day, when all is said and done, we do not give a shit at our very core. We got to show Putin he's up against a country willing to sacrifice huge swaths of its own people for a proxy war. Just to make a point. Here we go. More.
For Putin to understand what exactly he's up against from the point of view of the United States' staying power.
That's right.
Number one, Congress passed a $40 billion package for Ukraine, of which a substantial amount remains. And we are working on a month-by-month basis to move weapons at a pace, as I said before, that the Ukrainians can actually absorb and get out onto the battlefield with trained personnel to deploy them. That can go on just on the basis of what we have already had allocated to us resources for a considerable period of time. And then I strongly believe that there will be bipartisan support in the Congress to re-up those resources should
Me
it become
too.
necessary. Does that mean that there is the same level of intensity in the American public as there was in the early weeks of the war? Is it on TV 24/7? No. But is the reservoir of support in this country, as translated into the Congress and the executive branch, deep and sustainable from the point of view of doing whatever it takes for, as the president has said, as long as it takes? Yes. And I actually believe that that is basically true, despite the difficulties that Europe is facing on energy for the major European countries as well. And you see, actually, in a way, the issue today is not wavering of public support for Ukraine, but still upward pressure on governments there to do more and to supply more weapons and to go further with respect to sanctions. And you just saw the European Union take yet another step with its 7th package of sanctions this week alone, at the very time that all the headlines are saying somehow there's flagging interest in this issue.
So, I'm not a phrenologist, but I could tell based on the shape of that guy's head that he was going to be a huge asshole. I mean, before he said anything, I looked at his stupid Paul Begala haircut. And I just had a feeling he would be the most insufferable house of cards kind of sociopath. And I was right. I was right about that. Here's what Aaron had to say about that on tweeters. He said, in short, Biden administration is not concerned about the public's opinion or material needs because Congress has already approved enough to fund the Ukraine proxy war for a long time and it will again if asked. That's kind of amazing. Anything else you'd like to say about that today, Aaron?
But he was being interviewed by Jeffrey Goldberg, who is the guy who helped sell the Iraq War by writing all these stories in the New Yorker that Saddam was working with Al-Qaeda. So that's Jeffrey Goldberg's claim to fame. And now he's the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. That's just important because it speaks to the continuity between one major pro-war deception to another and how much contempt these people have for American public opinion. The point where the National Security Advisor is willing to admit we don't care about whether or not people are angry at us for taking their money and spending it on a hegemonic proxy war and not meeting their needs because we have enough money now. They've given us enough, and we're confident that if we run out of money, Congress will re-up. Those are Jake Sullivan's words, re-up.
Then why do they got to censor people?
Yeah, well, just in case.
They're that confident.
And just so you know, this is at the Aspen Security Forum 2022, which had just happened July 19th through 22nd. That's an annual 3.5-day conference in Aspen, Colorado, presented by the Aspen Strategy Group, has provided a nonpartisan public venue for global leaders to discuss the key national security and foreign policy issues of the day for the past 12 years. And U.S. to send Ukraine additional $270 million in military aid. So that guy's letting you know we're going to keep doing this. And this starts from July 22nd. That's the U.S. going to send another $250 million new aid package, which brings the U.S. total security assistance to $8.2 billion since the start of the Biden administration. Will include 4 more high mobility artillery rocket systems. Those are called HIMARS, 36,000 ammunition rounds for howitzer artillery pieces, and 580 additional loitering munition drones. Boy, that doesn't sound good. European Union approves another 500 million euros in weapon aid for Ukraine. That's on the same day.
Oh.
Isn't that weird? It's almost like it's coordinated. It's almost like there's a puppet master pulling the strings on this aid going to Ukraine on both sides of the Atlantic. It's almost like it. The European Union has approved another 500 million for the supply of weapons and equipment to Ukraine. Nearly all the money, 490 million euros, is to be spent on weapons and ammunition. The remaining 10 million euros will go towards equipment, fuel, and medical supplies. Boy, if I got to get into why don't we go to work for arms dealers? What are we doing? That's where the money is. I'm not kidding.
I was told I wasn't qualified, so that's the reason I don't.
And the great thing too, Jimmy, is arms makers now have the progressive stamp of approval. There's not a single progressive in Congress who has yet to vote no on any of these measures to fund the Ukraine proxy war and give billions of dollars to the military-industrial complex. The most recent measure was a vote to expand NATO to include Sweden and Finland, which is another boon for weapons manufacturers because now Sweden and Finland have to spend some of their budgets on
2%
weapons to get up to NATO standards. And the bill even enshrines that. It says that we urge all NATO member states to spend at least 2% of your GDP on military spending. So this is the squad and every other progressive in Congress, self-described progressive, voting to tell every NATO member state, make sure to spend 2% of your GDP on the military industrial complex.
That's right. So that's why would they want to add more countries to NATO, even though there isn't a threat from the Soviet Union anymore? And it's because the military-industrial complex gets every time a new country joins NATO, they're required by the charter that they have to spend 2% of their budget on military. And so that's a big boon to those people, to the bombs makers and the things and the NEMS. So
is it? I thought they don't pay. A lot of them don't pay their share, and then we just pay it. I guess they get their money either way. But is that why Trump was saying, "Oh, maybe we'll leave NATO if everybody doesn't start paying up"? Because we pay. That's why we're like, the next army below us, like 17th place or whatever, is right. Because we're paying for all these other armies.
This was one of Trump's accomplishments, if you can call it that. While Democrats and MSNBC and CNN were hyperventilating that he was a Russian agent, Trump was bullying NATO states into actually meeting their 2% pledge, and he actually succeeded. NATO has credited Trump for getting members to spend more money on the military-industrial complex. So,
well, he shouldn't have said that oil thing in Syria. Credit where credit's due, but that oil thing in Syria, he's got to go.
And so, Aaron, when you say things like that, I know when I say things like that, when I say, hey, not one progressive voted against this Ukraine military package, it came from Republicans, and now the Republicans are actually the anti-war choice for voting. People will then, instead of being angry and having their ire, taking it out on the progressive Democrats who vote for war, they take it out on me for pointing out that Republicans are more anti-war than the Democrats are right now. They get mad at me. So that's classic adult alcoholic behavior. I don't know if you're familiar with that kind of talk, but adult children of alcoholics have and that's a classic hallmark, is they have misplaced loyalties. And did you know that, Aaron? I don't know if you know that.
I hadn't heard that term before, but look, there's also this thing where these lawmakers are not being challenged. So to give an example, Democracy Now!, where I used to work, learned a lot about journalism there. The last week, they've had on 3 Democratic lawmakers. They've had on Jamie Raskin, Pramila Jayapal, who heads the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and today they had on Ro Khanna. Haven't asked any of these people a single question about the Ukraine proxy war, this global disaster, which is causing not just disaster in Ukraine, but is threatening nuclear war. I mean, New York City just had that ad threatening about that, warning about that. Global food prices are skyrocketing. People are starving, partly due to what Russia did, but also partly due to what the U.S. imposing sanctions that make it very hard for Russia to export food and fertilizer. So you think maybe when Democrats are voting in lockstep to fund all this and give billions of dollars to the military-industrial complex, they could be at least asked questions about it. But the last three guests of Democracy Now! Coming from the Democratic Party have not even been asked about it. Instead, they're talking about January 6th. That's what's on the minds of Democratic partisans right now. January 6th, not this catastrophic proxy war.
It is an amazing fall for Amy Goodman's Democracy Now! For me to be able to outdo them on a daily basis. And, you know, people recognize it, by the way. If you go by views, we certainly outdo them on YouTube. And, you know, she's embedded in Pacifica Radio. I used to be on Pacifica Radio until they all turned into Russiagators. And
Russiagate is what killed a lot of people's spirits. It's sad, and it compromised people into thinking that the way to resist fascism is to worship the CIA. And that's meant enlisting people in supporting a Ukraine proxy war, at least not challenging it. And it goes beyond Democracy Now! I mean, all these outlets that have identified with the squad and being progressive, they won't challenge the progressives in Congress on their actual votes for this proxy war. And that's a problem.
They won't challenge. Nobody will challenge the Democrat on anything. What are they not? What have they challenged them on? They have challenged them on the $15 minimum wage, or forced to vote, or health care, or even what happened to the public option? I mean, we're supposed to get that. Joe Biden ran on it. You guys have complete control of government. You don't even bring it up. They don't even mention it anymore. The public and nobody is going to hold the Democratic politicians' feet to the fire. Nobody, from the shitholes over at the Young Turks to the people over at the Lever and David Sirota to certainly the goddamn Intercept, which runs interference for the fucking Democratic Party. Nobody will do this. And now you're going to wonder why the Democrats are going to get wiped out in the midterms, and while we're going to have another guy worse than Trump as our president in a couple more years. It's because you guys wouldn't hold the Democrats accountable, so they didn't have to fucking do anything, and they didn't. They didn't do a thing. And congratulations. You all suck. You all suck. It's so easy to outdo you that I'm doing it. I'm doing it. Come see our stand-up comedy. We'll be in Los Angeles, Bakersfield, Indianapolis, Louisville, Cincinnati, Tulsa, Oklahoma City, Detroit, lots more. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for all our tickets.